Hi, I'm Eliot Schiaparelli from WFUV News. The coronavirus pandemic has hit the Bronx especially hard, but some of the borough's most vulnerable residents can't get government assistance due to their immigration status. Joining me today for our collaboration with BronxNet Television is Michelle Bialeck, the executive director from the Mount Carmel Teen Project, to talk about how the program is trying to help. Michelle, thank you for being here.
Hi, thank you.
So tell me specifically about your stimulus share program.
Okay, so we work with a whole bunch of families in the Belmont section of the Bronx. And, a big portion of our families are mixed status, meaning mixed legal status, meaning at least one person in the family does not have legal status. In this situation, this means for those families that they were not eligible initially for the stimulus that all of us citizens were eligible for. We found something inherently unfair about that. We know that these families are working very hard and struggling in the same ways we are, if not more, because they're not eligible for a lot of the things we take for granted. So, we thought, why not ask people to share just a little bit of their stimulus? So this is not about being rich and making a huge donation. And by making a donation, you're not saying, oh, I have money to spare. You're simply saying, I got this money and some people didn't, and I'm going to share a little bit of it.
So how are you finding families that are in need right now?
Okay, so we're finding families, kind of a very, very on the ground effort to find families. We're asking community leaders or residents, religious leaders to nominate families. All of our families are struggling in some ways, just like all people in this country are struggling in some way because of this, right? So we asked people to nominate families, where the situation is critical, where perhaps someone has died because of COVID and the family is struggling to collect funeral expenses, or perhaps a family member became ill and couldn't go to work, or the job was terminated because of COVID. A lot of our families are living on the poverty line already. So a change like that could be terrible for a family. A family could lose everything. And these are families who, even though we're not going to court right now, these are families that if they were evicted from their homes would not necessarily be applicable for any kind of housing, for any of the subsidies that citizens of the United States of New York might take for granted. So New York does a lot of things for undocumented families, and there are a lot of people doing things, but it's just, there are so many families, and there are pockets of New York that are kind of being overlooked, and this was one of them. So one person in the family has to be undocumented. So one person has to be a person who would have otherwise gotten the stimulus share, but did not because they're not documented. We have families, in our program that we've identified for this as well, families that had lost a family member and were struggling to begin with. And we're also looking, there are other elements of this, like childcare and making decisions about how you're going to make sure your child is educated through remote learning and all of these things. So the stresses on families and the choices that they're having to make are just very difficult. And we were looking for special cases. And sometimes we'll ask a family and they will say, you know what, I'm okay right now, but I have some friends, or there's this other family that's really not. So there's a true generosity there's a really generous sentiment, in how we're finding these families.
So this is all through Mount Carmel Teen Project. Tell me a little bit about how that got started and what you do in the Belmont community on a day-to-day basis.
Okay, great. So Belmont Teen Project St. Mount Carmel Teen Project got started a couple years ago when we had already been working in the community. So Fordham already does a lot of work in the community, providing ESL classes. And I was working with Fordham in that project, and within that project doing a little social service program. I was working with all of the families and really getting to know the families. This was several years ago. And I've worked in that community a lot, so there was a lot of overlap. I knew some of the families already, and we were doing a lot of work with the adults. There are services for the little ones, for the little kids. But one of the things that the adults said over and over was, I wish there was a safe place for my teenager, or I wish there was a place to better support my teenager. And we know that the Belmont area has a very high number of mixed status families. We know that the first US born child has numerous responsibilities that I could go into for hours that, a lot of other kids don't have. So, we thought this is a good idea. This is a really good idea. Let's see if we could get something going. Then, very unfortunately, Junior was killed just very close by. And that really shook up the community and politicians in the community. It definitely was not the first, and it won't be the last. And everyone in the Bronx community knows someone who's been the victim of gang violence or involved in gang violence. You could argue even if you're involved, there's a sense of victimhood there. Something happens to you, but it really, really shook up the community because it was a symbol for the violence that was happening and the need for change and the need for programs that strengthen the use of alternatives to violence. And so with that, we really worked with Richie Torres's office and kind of branched off to start an independent program that focuses on teenagers. So we focus on teenagers. We have intensive after-school programming with mental health and tutoring and academic support and tons of other activities. But we also provide counseling for families, and we provide bigger programming for the community at large, because we feel that we must serve the teen by serving not only the individual, but the family and the community. So we really think of ourselves as a community program. And so we've been going strong. We're a little program, but we're like a family in the Bronx. And we have been going strong for a couple of years now. Yeah, and we're an Alternatives to Violence program. That was what inspired us, but in working in that effort, we couldn't ignore the other factors that still really affect the community, and one major factor being legal status and how that affects a person and a family and every single person in the family. And so this is something that right now in this pandemic is really magnified.
So you said you've moved a lot of your programming to be remote given the pandemic. How else have you seen coronavirus affect the families and the teens involved in your program?
Oh, so first of all, I would say that a lot of people leading programs right now or running programs right now have expressed, and I felt this too in the beginning, a sense of like helplessness. Like, I want to be there, but we're literally not allowed to. I want to like go to someone's house, but we're not allowed to do that right now. So it's very strange, and we had to move everything over to remote very quickly. And, one of the barriers in that is that low-income expecting this kind of connection to all technology in low-income families is extremely unrealistic. So part of our effort started with, okay, we need to make sure all of the families, first of all, have basic needs met. Okay, so is there anyone who isn't eating, or whose landlord is threatening them to be evicted even though they can't be evicted? Or is there anyone who is in a particularly dangerous situation? Then right after that, we move to, okay, how are we going to get all these kids set up so that they can do school? Yeah, a lot of the things that you have to do. So we made sure all the kids picked up their computers, and we went with them, and and a lot of the families are a little bit detached from what the message was. Initially, it was hard to communicate with all these families, right? So we need your kid to pick up a computer. All right, so what happens when the kid is at home taking care of the littler kids because they're not in school? How does that teenager go to pick up his computer when he's babysitting like 3 little kids at home? There are all these things that just like weren't thought out for these families. So we supported with that, to get everybody what they needed to start off. And an internet is a big thing was a big thing that was missing. The signing up for free internet is not as accessible as it's made out to be. And a lot of, and you have to actually be online to do it. So you must do it with an outside source if you don't have internet in your house. So there was a lot of getting the kids set up. And then once the kids were set up, how much stress are you going to put on a parent or on a teenager to make sure that the 5-year-old learns how to read? How, there's that whole element. How can we support with that? Or how can we take some of that stress away? How can we make sure that the teenager understands like algebra 2 or gets that support they need from afar? So that's what we've really been working on. But in that, now that it's been like a couple months into this, we're really seeing the financial strains, and we're seeing deaths in the community, and we're seeing sickness in the community. So it's really taking its toll. Also, a lot of people who are immigrants, if their wishes, if they were to pass away, would be to be buried in their homeland. That's a huge expense. So that's another thing we've seen. There's really just a lot, but we're taking it one step at a time. The most basic needs to schooling, to, okay, how can we help, and what are the long-term effects here?
Right. Michelle, just to end on a slightly happier note, tell me about the response you've gotten to the stimulus share program.
Oh, absolutely. So it's been so beautiful, because these are everyday people. These are not like millionaires or billionaires who are donating. These are people who've seen the work we do, our little program in the Bronx, and paid attention to it and decided to support it. Some people have given us their entire stimulus check, and some people have given us a few $100s that they would have used, but they knew that having a little less meant a family could have more, or could have something. And so people have donated from really all over the country. It's not huge amounts of money, but it's enough to make a difference, and it's enough for us to know, and for the families to know, that people really care about them.
Wow. Michelle, thank you so much.
Thank you.